Okay, so this is the Bible study for Genesis chapter 26, verses 12 through 33. And we're kind of continuing a story that we began last week. The text says Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac reopened wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But the herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also, so he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." From there he went to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahuzah, his personal adviser, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away?" They answered, "We saw clearly that the Lord was with you. So we said, 'There ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you will do us no harm, just as we did not harm you, but always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. And now you are blessed by the Lord." Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning, the men swore an oath to each other. Then Isaac sent them on their way, and they went away peacefully. That day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. They said, "We've found water." He called it Sheba, and to this day the name of the town has been Beersheba. All right, so remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And the first question on our study is, what did we talk about in last week's study? And it should be Genesis 26 1 through 11, not 25 1 through 11. 26 1 through 11. A, there was a famine in the land. And that's true. B, Isaac went to Abimelech. God told him to go down to not to go down to Egypt for help. That's true. And C, Isaac seemed to follow in the footsteps of his father and told the men of the area that Rebekah was his sister, and that is also true. So we dealt with that again. Number two, what is happening now according to 26:12 through 13? A, Isaac planted crops. That's true. B, that same year he reaped 100-fold. That's true. So I guess let me just stop for a moment and say it is normal for if you plant a seed and a plant comes up, then what comes out of that plant is multiple seeds. So, for instance, um, we're not in a agricultural society probably here, um, but I grew up in Indiana, and corn is the thing in Indiana. In fact, there was a little theme park on the lake near where my great grandmother had a cottage that was called Indiana Beach, which is ironic in and of itself, but it was on a lake, so there was some truth to it being on a beach. But there was a this is a sidetrack, I know. But there was a commercial for Indiana Beach, and it was a crow singing a song to the tune of Back Home Again in Indiana, which is a famous song that is sung at the opening of the Indy 500. Used to be sung always by Jim Neighbors. But this crow was singing to that tune. There's more than corn in Indiana at Indiana Beach. Um, and that was for free. That corn is so ubiquitous in Indiana that they had to say there's more than corn in Indiana. There's a theme park too, and it wasn't a very big theme park, wasn't a really great theme park, but it was a theme park. There's another one in Santa Claus, Indiana, by the way, but none of that matters. So corn is something that I am familiar with, and corn um, is what I used to plant in my sandbox because my mom would spare some corn seeds from her garden and hand them to me, and they looked like shriveled up. Basically, if you were eating corn on the cob or corn off the cob, if you took that and you dried it and it shriveled up and it hardened, that's what the corn seeds looked like, the kernels of corn. And they usually put some kind of something on it, I think, and so they were always pink. But I think that's because there was some kind of a preservative or something that made it grow. I don't know what they put on the seeds or whatever. Which is probably not how James would do it. He's probably got the actual yellow ones, not the pink ones. But anyway, that nonetheless, that little seed is basically a kernel of corn. And if I plant a seed, by the way, we always used to put more than one seed in a hole because not always did a seed come up. So if I put two seeds in a hole, and one of those two seeds sprouted and the plant came up, and I got, let's just say, in my sandbox, I did not get very good return. They did not grow there wasn't good minerals and whatever things need to be in the soil in the sandbox. But I might get two cobs of corn, two ears of corn in the sandbox. Now, my mom might have got quite a lot more and a whole row, but let's just say that I planted two pieces of corn, two kernels, and I got two cobs of corn, two ears of corn um, out of it. And those ears of corn, how many kernels do they have on each of them? If there's 100 on each, then I produced 100-fold. I don't know. I have never really stopped to count how many would be on an ear of corn, but that's what we're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about now on a, that doesn't seem all that astounding a harvest, but I would say on a larger scale, if you planted a lot of seeds, that sometimes in a field the weather is such that that doesn't happen. I would drive past a cornfield and a low spot filled with water, and none of those plants came up. So you planted two or three in a hole probably in all those spots, and you've got 500. If you just say that in this whole section that flooded with water, that there were, you know, 10, 10, 10, that's 30 times three, that's 90 seeds that didn't even come up. So zero harvest from 90 of the seeds. So you start averaging that out and figuring out how it produces, and you can see how it would be easy for you not to come up with 100-fold, for you not even to come up with um, as many seeds or as many fruits, if you will, as the seeds that you planted, depending on the year. And so the one of the big things I think that is significant about agriculture, and is significant that it's so widely used in scripture, beyond the fact that it was how they lived back then, is that there is a very clear balance between what I do to plant the seed and what God does in making it grow, and the things that I have absolutely no control over. So it's really clear to us when we plant things what we do have control over and what we don't have control over. And maybe in other areas of work that we do, that balance is not near as clear. But I think that is clear. So the fact that Isaac planted, by the way, in a time when you had to dig your own well, in a time where there was not that much water, and they had to dig their own wells to find water, and then he was very successful with his crops. That stood out to everyone, that as a blessing from God that was uncommon return. Um, so, I would just say that, I gave the example of corn, but I'm not sure that every plant that you plant has as many seeds on it as corn does. And I don't know how many a pumpkin has in it, but or how many a tomato has in it, but I'm just thinking, I'm not sure that all of them have quite as many as an ear of corn. So maybe that was a bad example. I don't know. Anyway, that same year he reaped 100-fold. So the fruit that came from it was 100 times what he had planted, which means that you can set aside some for next year's planting. And if you plant the same amount next year, then 99 of what you got is for your consumption or for you providing to those around you. See, because the Lord blessed him. So then there's a very clear recognition that God was involved with this, that God had blessed, and the reason that he had so much return was because God was involved. So Isaac became rich, and his wealth continued to grow. So if you plant and you receive that kind of return, now you can feed all your people, all your animals. Perhaps you have some left over to provide for the people around you, which means then that you would have trade goods, something that they made that they could trade for the fruit of your harvest. So yeah, so that's what we're talking about. So he became wealthy because the harvest was so plentiful that it went above and beyond what was required just to plant the next year and to feed him and his servants and his family and his animals. Number three, how did the Philistines respond according to 26:14 through 16? A, the Philistines envied him. So, yeah, so they were upset. They looked around and they said, we're farming in the same area. We don't have the same return as this guy does. He's obviously blessed and they envied him. And what do people do when they envy somebody who's doing better than them? They don't try to better themselves, they try to pull that person down so that we're all even. And it says the Philistines stopped up all the wells that Abraham's servants had dug in the time of Abraham. So they had all these wells that they had dug to provide for themselves, and that was a big deal. And they went through and stopped them up. So they plugged them. They just poured dirt into them probably and filled them so that it's funny because I'm not sure how well they understood what happened with a well, but it was still kind of mind blowing to me. My family likes to visit caves, and what most of us don't understand what goes on under the earth, but basically there's this level of rock and dirt, topsoil up here, but then under that somewhere there's basically underground water, underground rivers, if you will, in many cases. That have sort of flowed and even busted out or like washed away. So caves are formed by water flowing underground, and so there's a space underneath the top level of dirt and rock where you could actually go down there and breathe. And they're usually formed by flowing water underground that erodes and creates space. So there'll be flowing water, but then there'll also be dry space. And then depending on how far down that goes, there are different levels of caves. And oftentimes, when the water is in the top level, if there's also water flowing in the bottom, then the water dripping down into through the levels creates all those cool cave formations, the stalactites and the stalagmites, and all of those things that you see when you visit a cave. But when you drill a well, you basically are drilling through rock and sand and whatever else down into the level where there is there's water, where there's like flowing river. And you're probably going down below the cave that would not have water, or may have water just in the bottom or flowing alongside into the level that's still filled with water. Now, maybe somebody could correct me in some of my inaccuracies because I was so amazed that I didn't understand this. So, in Kentucky, where they have all the caves, and Missouri and different states that have a lot of hills and mountains, not like mountains like this, but lower mountains, like the Ozarks or the Appalachians or whatever they call in Kentucky, the hills that are there. It's on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Smokies and all of that. Um, so um, it turns out that when the water level goes down and opens up a cave, that sometimes there's not enough solid, support for the ground on top. So then the ground collapses, and that's what we call a sinkhole. And so that happens a lot in Florida because there's so much sand that the sand washes away in lower levels, and then all of a sudden this huge sinkhole opens up. Well, it turns out in America, in Kentucky, in the early 1900s or whatever, when people didn't know any better, they saw this big hole in the ground, and they're like, we should fill that hole. And so they started throwing their garbage into the hole, because it just went away. It reminds me of that little, I think it was Tiny Toon Adventures or whatever, when I got home when I was a kid, and the little animal would flush the toilet and put the end of the toilet paper down the in the toilet, and the toilet paper would just unroll, and you would say, toilet paper go down the hole. And so it goes down, and it's just like that. We just throw the garbage in, and it goes down the hole, and it goes away. And well, it turns out it goes down that hole into the cave, flows in the water, goes right into our drinking water. So all of a sudden, they had no good drinking water. So all of that is, if you don't know what a well is a hole dug down into the place where there's water. And so, what do you got to do to stop up the well? Well, you probably just dump enough dirt down there that it piles up in the open space and then starts clogging the hole, so that when you send a bucket down or whatever, it hits dirt before it hits any water. And so they stopped up their wells. They could have thrown garbage in there like Americans did when we didn't know any better. Um, but either way, they stopped up these wells. So then, in addition, Abimelech told Isaac to move away because he had become too powerful for them. So all of a sudden, just like has happened before, the land can't support this many people or this many animals. The you know you're in our land and there's a lot of you and this is feeling dangerous. As it turns out, that's also how Egypt felt when Israel was there. And the Pharaoh put them into slavery because he was afraid that they would overtake them. And so it's scary to have a people amongst you that are clearly blessed by God, in a way that you are not, and they're gaining wealth and power and influence, because they very well could overtake you. And so that became an issue for Abimelech. And he sent Isaac and his people away. Number four, where did Isaac go and what did he do according to 26, 17, and 18? That should be 18, 17, and 18. A, he moved to the valley of Gerar. B, he reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father, which the Philistines has stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. So he moved down into this valley. This is a place where his father had already dwelt, had already lived, and had dug these wells, but now they were stopped up. So Isaac sent his people to redig these wells, to clear them out so that he could use these wells again. Number five says, is there any significance to this? A, nah, it probably just jumped into the Bible accidentally without purpose. And that is a joke because, like, we don't really believe that anything jumped into the Bible without purpose. We believe that God has given us scripture on purpose, and what he included has a purpose. And so there's some purpose that we're told this. B, well, I suppose that Isaac could have dug new wells instead. He seems to have done so in addition, but not instead. So, in other words, we see that, God dug these, or Isaac dug these holes. He dug additional wells, but he also reopened the old wells. So there, for some reason, he thought that was important. See, maybe he was just nostalgic, or they were easier to dig than the new ones. Yeah, could have been either. I mean, he used the same names. There may have been some nostalgia or appreciation for history and God's care for Abraham in the past. But honestly, if they had been dug before, then there's water there. You know that there's water there, and and there's you're digging out probably softer ground than what you would have to dig through, to dig a brand new one. So maybe there was good practical reason for that. D, well, that's a joke. Well, the names, both of people and places, mattered a lot and often had significance. So I'm sure there was significance to those names that tied back to God's work in Abraham's life. So these names mattered. Names were significant. Names had to do with what God had done in many cases, or something associated to with the difficulty of digging those wells or whatever. So, when we start to think of, you know, when, if I'm trying to do something, I'll just say this: I think we don't think this way enough in American culture. But I pastor a church, Sunday, a Church of the Nazarene, that has a history. And I realize that when I came in, it helps that I was on staff for some time before I became the lead pastor, because I came in with an appreciation for the history of the people of God at Sandia. I came in with knowing, having um, knowing, even though I became the pastor when we were in new locations, I was married in the original location, and I knew the history of that building. And I have pictures of the fellowship hall when it was the sanctuary, before the new sanctuary was built, before the gym was built. I had pictures of those things, and sometimes we spend too much time focusing on buildings and things like that in the church. But there's something significant to the faith the people of God had when they were establishing our church, when they were building our church, when they're building the buildings that would house our church and help us to do ministry in the community. I also have appreciation for the buildings we now occupy and the faith that it took to step out and go in that direction that changed the sort of history and direction of our church. But I recognize that I build on the shoulders of others. I stand on the shoulders of others. I build on foundations that they have built. That our church is not brand new, and we're not forging a path into a desert that is unknown. We are building on foundations that others have already built upon. Um, and so there's significance to that. And I think we should appreciate that a little more. I think we got to be careful not to appreciate it at the expense of, we shouldn't just do ministry because this is the way we've always done it, and ignore what God is trying to lead us into in the future. But we should have appreciation for what God has done in the past, and an understanding of the faith that it took for the people of God to accomplish those things. There is something satisfying and praise invoking about making something fruitful again that the enemy had tried to destroy. This sounds very much like what God does everywhere and with anyone who will allow him to work. So in other words, um, the enemy tried to destroy what the people of God in faith had created. And whenever God is involved with the creation of something and the enemy tries to destroy it, then when God restores, I mean, that's the story of creation. God created his people. The enemy tempted us and we were led astray. But in Christ, we are forgiven and we are able to be brought back into right relationship with God. And that is a restorative work. The imagery of these wells that produced water, but then the enemy poured dirt in and tried to squelch the water producing ability of these wells. And then God, in and through Isaac and his people, redug these wells, and they have the same names as before. There's a restoration work of God that happens there. And so then there's something so significant about that, that we don't want to miss there, by saying, yeah, he just redug, maybe he was nostalgic, maybe whatever. I think is such a powerful thought. Number six, what happened according to 26:19 through 22 when Isaac's servants dug new wells? A, people argued over them and claimed them for their own. So Isaac named them after the quarrels and moved on, which is amazing. He just said, okay, we dug a well. That was hard work. We found water, and now the other people around think that it should be their water. So he didn't, there was a quarrel. So I can't say that they didn't fight over it. They fought over it, but in the end, he sort of surrendered, handed them over to the people there, and moved on to a new place, dug another well. There was a quarrel over that one. finally, B, he finally dug a well that nobody quarreled over and decided that the Lord had finally given him room to flourish in the land. So it's almost as if he went a ways away, dug a well. Okay, they've asked me to move. I'm going to go on. I'm going to go here. He dug a well, and the people of the area said, no, this is our water. Okay. Well, he moved on a little further, dug a well. The people of the area said, "This is our water too," and so he said, "Okay." He moved a little long farther, and when he got there, nobody argued with him over the water. So now he's gotten far enough away from people that there's nobody to argue over the water, and God has provided him a place where he and his people can flourish. And so that's quite the process of finding the place where God has led us. Most of us would have liked to kind of been shown that up front and skipped the first two wells, I guess. But number 7, what happened in 26, 23 through 25? A, the Lord appeared to Isaac. Yes. B, the Lord renewed his promise to Abraham with Isaac. Yes. So when we go back and hear that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God sort of with each generation renews his covenant with his people, and so he was the God of Abraham, but now Isaac is having direct contact with God. And there is a renewal that's happening here. See, Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. So Isaac didn't ignore this interaction with the God of his father, but rather he chose to worship the God of his father. And then Isaac's servants dug a well, and it's a little confusing because I think that maybe the parts of this story really go like this. And so he's talking about the process of digging the wells, and then he's talking about God's appearing, and maybe this well that they're digging now there is the same well. But it says they came to him after the Lord talked to him and all this, and they told him about this well that had been dug, and there's fresh water there. Number 8, what happened in 26, 26 through 33? A, Abimelech, Ahuzath, and Phicol come out to meet Isaac. This should sound familiar for those of us that have been with us through the study of Genesis. Abimelech and Phicol, perhaps these are titles or names of the position of the king and the head of the military. They came out to Abraham also, perhaps not the same guys, but the same positions, if you will. But yeah, they came out to meet Isaac, and B, Isaac asked them why they had come since they had been hostile and sent him away. Why? What are you doing? Oh my gosh, you sent me away. Now I'm way out here. I'm away from you. Nobody's arguing with me about the water here. And what are you doing here? Are you pursuing me? Are you chasing me? Why are you following me? Why are you out here? You didn't want me near you, and now here you are near me. C, they answered, we saw clearly that the Lord was with you. So now we start to get to the bottom of what's going on here. D, they wanted to make a treaty with Isaac that he would not harm them since they had never harmed him, and they sent him away peacefully, and now he's blessed by the Lord. So they said, we see that God's blessing you. We just want to make sure that as God blesses you, you don't attack us, and you remember that we were peaceful with you. And even when we sent you away, we sent you away peacefully. We didn't like attack you because you were growing powerful. We said, we don't want war with you, but you're growing powerful. Please distance yourself. So they want peace. Why do they want peace? Because God is with Isaac. And you really want peace with the person that God is with, because honestly, um, if you quarrel with a person, that's one thing. If you quarrel with God, that's a different thing. So they wanted peace with this one blessed by God. And this is a way, as we read through Genesis and through the rest of the Old Testament, we are going to find that many people dealt with Israel this way. That Israel has historically not been a large nation, and yet, because God was with them, Israel was a scary people to the neighbors because they saw what God was doing in the lives of Israel, in the nation of Israel. And it, you don't want to be against that. The reason the king of Moab invited the prophet and said, "Curse Israel," is because he saw what was going on with, and this is after this, quite a while after this, but he saw what was happening to the other nations that Israel came against, and he said, "God is with them. I don't want. They need to be cursed or something. I don't want them to come against me." So this is a common theme throughout the history of Israel that they become a target in some cases specifically um, Israel is blessed by God, and that's scary to the people around. And a lot of people, there are other instances where people lie about who they are and try to form a treaty with Israel because they don't want to be destroyed by Israel. Um, so Isaac made the treaty with them, and the servants found water in the well they were digging, and this is what is now known as Beersheba. So the well was called Sheba, the town was called Beersheba. That is a name that we will hear throughout the Old and New Testament. The servants found water in the well. I already said that. Number 9, can people see God's blessing on you? Yes, no, explain. We could say, no, I know God's blessing me, but nobody seems to notice. We could say, no, I'm not sure God's blessing me. I think the rarer answer, honestly, is yes, which I'm not sure. I just really believe that if we are truly blessed by God, that it will be so apparent. And I don't know that we all become wealthy like Isaac, that that's what we're talking about with blessing. But I do believe that God's blessing becomes obvious to the people around us. And there are some people that just seem like, I know that God is with you because I can see the fruit flowing over everywhere. And honestly, I think that's what should be. That blessing will look different because I don't believe that God blesses us financially all the time like that. But I do believe that God blesses, and I do believe that when He blesses, it is obvious to the people around us. And I don't want to, I know we're not supposed to use ourselves as a positive example all the time, but um, I, um, when I, before I went into ministry, before I came back to Christ, I was terribly insecure. I was terribly, um, um, honestly depressed, but I didn't think much of myself, even though I was pretty smart, pretty educated. I wasn't making the most of that, and I joke with people because I graduated college, my undergrad, with a 2.8. Every degree that I've gotten since then, I've had a higher GPA. I think most people that know me would think that it's surprising that I graduated with a 2.8 and not something higher. But one, I was at a difficult school. Two, I was drinking heavily and not paying as much attention to school as I should have. And therefore, not blessed by God, really clearly. So I can use myself as a negative example so that I can talk about the contrast, the changes that happened when I came to Christ and when He started blessing my education. But also, I'm at this job with hospice, and um, my previous job in hospice, I was only there like 9 months. And when I left, people were so sad to see me go. They said, um, they said you are a stabilizing presence in the office, and I was barely ever in the office. It was really odd. Even before that, when I was in engineering, they threw me like a retirement party because I had been there 5 years, and I was young, and I left and went into ministry. And they got me a cake, signed a picture of our plane, and presented it to me. Really, I don't think they ever do that to people that just quit after 5 years, but they considered me going into ministry a different thing, and maybe saw something different in what was going on in my life. My time now in hospice, I often feel like people respond to me in a different way than I've ever felt responded to or expected to be responded to. And I believe that they see God's blessing on my life. I have people call and ask for advice, who are not Christian, who are stated not Christian. Um, One lady is Jewish, one, others agnostic, but come and ask for advice anyway, because there's something about me. And I guess I used the previous examples of what that looked like when I was in my undergrad to show that that's not just because I'm smart. It's not just because there's something about me that I'm just inherently wise in some way. I really believe it's very much because of God's blessing and work in my life, because it was not like that before. And so God has obviously done something that's changed me and somehow shows itself to the people around me, even in non Christian circles, even in secular workplaces and things like that. And so I really believe that that's the experience that we should have. Um, And if we're not having that, we need to ask ourselves, you know, it's not a matter of, oh, I'm not blessed by God. I need to ask for God's blessing. But honestly, I believe God blesses those who seek Him. And maybe if we're not showing the blessing of God in our lives, maybe it's because we're trying to do things on our own. Maybe it's because our life really isn't being lived out at some level, in the way that it should be in response to His love and His grace. And so that's where we need to really reflect on what we're seeing, and that may be the fruit of something deeper that we need to address.